Hey there! Doing something a little bit different with this video. That is to say, I'm wholesale ripping off someone else's formats. Uh, Specifically, Noah Antweiler, aka the Spoony One, and his Counter Monkey series. If you haven't seen Counter Monkey, I highly recommend that you look it up. It is a show where said the Spoony One recounts stories about RPGs, tabletop RPGs to be specific. So, Dungeons and Dragons and Shadowrun, Pathfinder, whatever. All of the above and any and all interesting tabletop stuff. And he gives advice, and he tells silly stories from his past, and he gives, all sorts of different interesting things. And I haven't been playing tabletops for as long as a lot of people. I started in the fall of 2011. It's only been about 3.5 years. But I've done a number of, different campaigns, both playing and DMing. And I've had a lot of different experiences, but I was racking my brain thinking about if I had any stories worth telling. Because I think this format's very interesting. I think that on a day-to-day basis, it's very difficult to get people interested in this campaign that you had. I've heard it being said, many times that no one cares about the story that happened at your D&D game because it's only interesting to people who played in it. But then Counter Monkey comes along, and people love that series. People love hearing those stories. So it just needs the right format. And apparently the right format is rambling into a webcam. Because rather than you being stuck in a conversation where you're trying to engage, you can listen to this, possibly multitask or whatever, and get this enjoyable story while not having it forced upon you. I guess that's maybe the difference. I don't know what the difference is. Or it could just be that the creator of Counter Monkey, the Spoony One, is just super funny and intelligent, which he is, and therefore people love his camera presence, and so they're willing to sit through his 2-hour rants about alignment or whatever, right? Excuse me. So I realized that of all the things I could talk about, there's one story that pops to mind instantly that, I would have to do before I even consider doing any others. When you think about a lot of stories, you sort of have to fit 2 criteria. Number 1, obviously, is it interesting? This is even less about what happened in the story, but more about there needing to be a point. The minutia of a lot of D&D sessions could, in theory, be interesting if the plot is compelling, if the characters were role-playing really well, if unexpected things happened, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a good story, because there's no point at the end of it if it's just, yeah, and then that's how we beat the dragon and got the loot. That's sort of a boring ending, even if the way there was interesting. There needs to be something leading you to believe that the ending is going to be interesting. That's the first part. And the second part is this your story to tell? I think this part is important. I could probably dig and find things that other players have done in games that I've been playing in, or other things that GM has done in games I've been playing in. I don't feel that's my story to tell. Something my character did, other characters can be involved, but it has to be my story. This because I was GMing this campaign, and the point of this is ultimately to talk about my mistakes in this story. I think it's my story to tell, even though it does heavily involve these other players. Their actions shaped it, obviously. That's the nature of tabletop role-playing. It's collaborative. That's why it's interesting. But there's still a distinction to be made. But I thought about this story, and I was hesitant at first, but I realized that I think it's very valuable. But I was hesitant because it needs a lot of explaining. I could do very quick Cliff Notes summaries of stuff, but then the story you won't understand the purpose. Because like I said, the important thing here is the purpose of me telling the story, which I will be upfront about. The main purpose is, it's actually multifaceted. It's an interesting conversation to be had. But the main purpose is to talk about badly railroading players and then having a campaign derail or a session derail because of poor railroading and poor planning. Not that you didn't plan, but that your plan was flawed. That's sort of what this story is leading to. And you don't understand why I planned things the way I did and why they were wrong unless I give you context. But the context is really long. I also just think I'm kind of egotistical in this one way. Usually I'm pretty much not at all. But I actually really like the story for this campaign, even though I will admit it wound up being very flawed for a Pathfinder game. We were playing Pathfinder as the system that I'm going to be discussing. It wound up being very flawed for a Pathfinder game in some ways. I think aspects of it could be used, but not the way I was doing it. And it's not even that it would be better like a novel or anything. I think it only works as a tabletop game, but it doesn't work very well. The backstory is interesting. I just don't know what you would do with it. You'd have to shift this. Anyway, I'm talking in circles around this. So let's start just by talking about this. What was this campaign? This is the second campaign that I've ever game mastered. Currently, that was my last campaign that I've ever game mastered. Happened in the fall of 2013. Fall to essentially like September to December of 2013. So it's just about a year and a half ago, or less. Since then, I haven't DM'd any other games simply from lack of opportunity. I've tried to get stuff started, but there just isn't time for other people. So it's not like, don't think that the moral of this story is, and that's why I never DM'd again. I'm going to DM again, I'm sure, someday. But this was my second and currently most recent campaign that I DM'd. What's the story? So, I had played Papers, Please, which is an indie game where you're a border control agent, and you just have to figure out if people have the appropriate paperwork to get through the border. It sounds really boring. Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. Brilliantly executed game. Highly recommend you play it. But it made me interested in this idea about security and kingdoms and countries being on lockdown and what that could mean. I thought about it in terms of fantasy, and I just started having crazy ideas. And then my friends were like, they really wanted a DM, and they were like, we would really like it if you would DM, because we all want to play, because we have these ideas. I was like, okay. So I was like, that's, an idea I'm calling on. And then I was also inspired by this game called Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery. This is a very slight inspiration, but there's just these great, powerful moments where you get these MacGuffins in the game called the Trigons, which are just total, I don't want to say parodies, pastiches, references, of the Triforce. But, you get essentially three triangles that are upside down, unlike compared to the regular Triforce. And, they don't really combine, you just have them sort of separately. And the moment where you get them, the way the music swells, the way it sort of pulses, and, energizes you, I was like, I like this idea of reaching this relic that isn't tangible in a way in our world. You get to the bottom of a dungeon, and it's a sword. It's a magic sword. It's cool, you like it, but it's tangible. It's understandable, it's comprehensible. I wanted something beyond. Something that, if you imagined experiencing this, it would be transcendent. And I wanted to do that, and I thought about Pathfinder just released rules recently for something called Mythic Power. Sorry, like I said, I'm giving you a lot of context and backstory here. It's going to go on for a while, so strap in, get a snack. Pause it if you need to get a snack. So Mythic Power is essentially another layer of power you can place over a character. So normally, a character has class levels, and they can have different classes. They can keep leveling up in one class. They can prestige into special classes that they have to unlock. But Mythic Power is separate from all that. When you get Mythic Power from something, the DM puts a way that the players receive Mythic Power. They pick sort of a path, which is like a class, but they have to call it something different so it doesn't relate. And then that Mythic path will progress and get better on its own scale. That's different from experience, which is how you get levels in Pathfinder. And it provides another set of powers that are meant to sort of amplify or complement your class abilities, but raise your power level significantly. It's basically a way to take players who are doing stuff in the normal sort of realm, and then elevate them significantly. You can either use this to take them to higher level content than they'd normally be able to deal with, or you can use it to take already high level characters and push them into, like, epic level. Well, in D&D, what would be called epic level, which would be fighting gods, not necessarily fighting gods, fighting the, like, servants of gods, doing their bidding, traveling across worlds, etc. So I thought, I want to give players mythic power, because I think it's fun. I wasn't planning at the time that we were going to have new players. We did. I was just going to deal with that down the line. But I wanted to do that, just say 2 very seasoned veteran players. I had not, and, you know, I'm going to get to the players in a second. But with all that in mind, I started coming up with this idea for the campaign. So I like to make custom settings. I've never really used an established setting. I've never really gone and said, okay, here's, at the Pathfinder setting, it's called Galarian. But I never said, okay, here's Galarian. I'm going to set my campaign in Galarian. Look at its maps, like, plot lays out. I'd rather just come up with my own, like, nations and kingdoms and politics and map and you know, I want to create a map and a kingdom that fits the game I want to play. Every campaign I make has a purpose, right? There's never a campaign that's just, here's 5 sessions where we're hunting down these orcs. Okay, never mind, now we're doing something else. You know, it's always, everything has a purpose. It's got a start and a finish. It leads somewhere. I might, if I was better, now that I'm, you know, learned a lot, I might put paths in there, but everything centralizes around an idea. The world is meant to convey a specific feeling for this game. The world fits what I want to tell, the story, essentially, so that I'm never bored. I'm always telling the story I want to be telling, essentially. It's selfish, but I also think it's just very natural to want to create your own setting. I like writing, I like stories, I like characters. I want to make some. So here's this setting. The campaign was to take place mostly just on this one continent. I hadn't really established any of the other continents, just because I didn't need to. I would have if it had come up. So on this one continent, the players start in this kingdom called Preyal. Preyal is very unique in that, in the center of this continent is essentially a mountain range that is ovular. So literally, like, the mountains, like, move like that. So there's a big open empty space in the middle, like, really big. And then, you know, mountains, and then outside of them, the rest of the continent. And at the sort of the north middle of these mountains, it's a very slight valley that you can use to travel out of this, you know, inner area into the rest of the continent. And the Kingdom of Preyal very tightly controls that valley, and they tightly control passage, like I said, based on papers, please, and tight border controls. And sort of, you know, they have a kingdom spread out in that middle area, but that's all. They're completely, you know, sealed away from everyone else, and they like it that way. They block people off. They have very specific rules about citizenship, and you have to have documents proving who you are. Like, they're very, very hardcore about this. There were 2 other nations that I didn't really define because, again, they weren't going to come up, and if they did, it was going to be very mild. If the player said they were going to travel there, I would have found a way to stop them. But there's one nation to the north, so there's 3 others on that continent. Like I said, the other 2 didn't define. The one to the north is called Bale. They are... The players didn't know about it going into the campaign because it was intentional that you've lived in this country, and information about the outside kingdoms isn't really allowed to be spread because of what this kingdom is. So, but Bale was more technologically advanced, more open. Its king was a little bit more aggressive and forceful. He's actually currently at war with one of the other kingdoms. It's sort of a long, protracted war where, like, you know, their borders are constantly being contested, but they're not, like, marching into their cities usually. It's just constant tiny skirmishes on the borders. But he's, you know, always afraid that he's going to lose and that things are going to go wrong. But he's they're very technologically advanced comparably. You know, they might have light guns, inside Preal, but he would have, his, guards and his inner circle would likely have much more advanced weaponry that other people hadn't seen. So he was very technologically focused. And they make Preal and Bale have light trade. Preal is very restrictive on what they allow into the kingdom as far as like importing. There's basically nothing. They only take what they think they need. They leave everything else out. So when you're in Preal, this is the last thing I'll explain before I get into things. Not really. Anyways, I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt myself. I'm just going to keep going and talking. So, in Preal, your citizenship, like I said, is very specific and focused. And there's 3 levels of citizenship. You can be, when you first move to the kingdom, you are an immigrant. That is level 1. You are given that status. You get your papers, that's immigrant. They basically send you to one city, and you have to stay there. You cannot leave the general boundaries of that city without explicit permission. You have to work and show that you're working. People are probably going to check on you. And then after a set period of time, which is based on your race, by the way, because yes, the kingdom's pretty damn racist, you will eventually get upgraded to the next level. Basically, the core races minus half-orc take like 6 months. The more humanoid races that aren't the core races and half-orc, or the more humanoid races and half-orc take about a year, and then there's like some other not as accepted races that take like 2 years. And then there's some races where it's pretty much like you can't really walk in and get these papers. You pretty much would be killed on sight. This would be like drow, orcs, duergars, swerfneblins, dompiers, which are half vampires, etc. And you would only really get citizenship on a really special situation, and it probably wouldn't start you off an immigrant because that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, and if you have a child, I will note, in this kingdom, they are the same status as you. So you can't, an immigrant doesn't have children that are born of the next level. And immigrant children start as immigrants, and they too have to wait, like, that waiting period. Granted, for them, it's like they probably couldn't go advance until they were, the maximum time it would take is 2 years, so they probably wouldn't want to be able to manually advance themselves until they were older than that anyways, but still. For logistical purposes, they're still immigrants, and you also need a certain amount of money, and, you need to pass a test, basically. So a lot of people will stay immigrants for a while because they don't have the money, they don't have the chance to do the test. There's racist people who are like, if they go to take a test, we'll just grade it wrong and tell them you failed, try again in a month or whatever. There's, certain races you're just looked down upon, like, there's rat folk, for instance, and I bring that up for a reason. They're just tiny rat people, they're not going to be looked, at as particularly special. Like, once they're citizens, they'll be treated okay, but immigrant rat folk, not going to be treated well. Immigrant humans, they can make their way. But then you get your second level after you immigrant, you pass this test, you get, you're just called a citizen. Very simple. You cannot freely leave the kingdom, but you can't freely move within it. So you can leave cities without asking explicit permission. You just need to show you're a citizen at the border, and they'll be like, all right, you can go. And so I tried to show my players, that they were going to start at level 1 or 2. It was their option. But I told them, pick whatever makes the most sense for your backstory and your character you want to make. Don't worry about it affecting the plot. I will make it work. You don't have to worry about that. It's not going to be important. If you're like, I'm an immigrant. I can't leave the kingdom, the city that we're in. It was going to be like, I wasn't going to be like, well, that stops the campaign, dead halt for an hour until we figure out how to get, no. I was going to get around that. And then there's a third level above citizen that's called diplomat. Diplomat is specifically awarded on rare cases. You basically need to do something special. You need to be friends with someone, or you need to bribe someone. Simple as that. Diplomat, you have special privileges inside the kingdom. You can pretty much leave and come into the kingdom at more free range, and you can run for office in the cities. Basically, each city has an elected official that, helps decide on the laws, along with the king, and you can only run for that position if you are a diplomat. And you're not going to see too many diplomats outside of the core races. Not even that many outside of human. Which is, I don't like to make human-centric things. It just made sense in this campaign. Other campaigns, I will be very specific that I'm like, I don't want to have a world that's human-centric. It's boring. I won't be as silly to make it not core race-centric because... But I like to make it more that it's a mixed world, where like the core race is all equally spread. There might be a human kingdom. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting off topic. So, that was sort of what the established setting I gave to them. I basically told my players, you live in the capital city of the kingdom, and your premise was, you live here, you work here on a day-to-day basis, this is where you are, and you're going to your favorite bar for a night of drinks. And that was where our first system was going to start. So I had 4 players in this campaign. We're going to go through all of them, because again, you need to know who these people are, because that explains how things happened the way they did. So let's just kind of go in random order. Not really random. So the first player was pretty much my best friend that I made at college. The one who taught me how to play Pathfinder. He GM'd my first game. My first campaign. This is my first time. No, this wasn't my first time having him as a player, but this is one of my first times having as a player since a certain incident that I want to talk about. And it was the first time having us play where I actually sort of knew a little bit more what I was doing, and he was playing something a little bit more fair. He still found a way to screw that up, but we'll get into that. Not really. Maybe a little. So he decided he wanted to play something fun. He really likes half-breed characters. Half-elves are one of his popular ones, but he also has a weakness for Dompiers. Like I said, half-vampires. And he decided he wanted to be a Dompier alchemist. Specifically, he took the archetype Chirurgeon, which is basically a surgeon. He's a doctor. So, his character archetype was basically he's a doctor. He's a surgeon. He, treats people's wounds. So he was going to be the party healer, more or less. He didn't really need to do that because the party was too damn good. But again, we can get to that. But being a Dompier, that wouldn't really be allowed if that was going to be that's one of, especially like a drow, if they had done enough good, could make it by. Like, as long as they had their papers on them, they could probably be okay. They wouldn't be treated well, but they could live. Dompiers are one of those ones where even if you did something well, the fact that you're a Dompier is still enough. You're half a vampire. That's a bit too much for anyone to accept, even if you've done well enough to be like, okay, we'll grant you citizenship as a token of, like, appreciation for your service. Dompiers pretty much are going to be killed once they're discovered. Or imprisoned, whatever. So he saw that and he was like, no, I still want to do this. I have, And he basically said, well, I pretend to be a human. And I was like, right. But I brought up to him all these interesting things. Because I was like, I want you to play this Dompier, but I want you to understand, I'm trying to do this semi-realistically here. And I would like your character to be logical. He was like, yeah. So I was like, well, first of all, your Dompiers live a lot longer than humans. After about... Like, you don't hit... Dompiers aren't supposed to hit adulthood until, I think, a little bit older than humans. And then after that, people would start to notice that you weren't aging. It's going to be very obvious. You're not going to age for a while. You're probably going to get to about 100 and still look like a 20-year-old, really. And he was like, yeah, you're right, that's true. And so I was like, also your eyes, also your skin, your ears, etc. And he was like, so he was like, okay. So he started, assembling all, the amount of money he'd need to spend to accurately disguise himself on a day-to-day basis. And I was like, okay. And then he explained, like, and I basically change identities every 20 years. Like, once people see that I'm, once I'm at an age where they should start to notice I'm getting older, I say, sorry, peace out, nice seeing ya. I leave the city I'm in, act like I'm going somewhere, sort of disappear off the frontier, and then I change my identity, forge some papers, get some stuff done, and then I go to a new city, and, I'm a new person, basically. Change my appearance a little bit. He winds up getting, I think, later on he gets a match that doesn't completely change his appearance at will, for fun. And he says, he changes his name, and he actually, for most of the campaign, he talks with an accent that is actually a taken on accent. It is an accent he adopts in, like, his character adopted this accent, and he did it in real life as well. That was meant to disguise him in case anyone saw him and thought he looked similar. He would talk very differently. So, you know, he's a great role player, and I was appreciative of all that. So that, you know, before coming up with all that and role playing it well, I allowed him to get away with being a Dhampir, and that people did not suspect him. So that was his character. Basically, just a very good, honest doctor who happened to be half vampire. I guess the basic idea of his backstory was that he lived for a while, and back a while ago there had been an outbreak of, we just come up with a generic idea of the plague. Not necessarily, is it the Black Plague? I don't know. But just a plague that killed a lot of people and was very bad. And he basically lost all of his family to that. But he lived because he was a Dhampir and because he was better at this sort of stuff. And he just decided he was going to try to heal people and stop stuff like that from happening again. And, you know, we established sort of in the modern version, the plague is no longer an outbreak, but it's still a problem. It is no longer killing thousands or however many, but it is still a thing that happens and that is, you know, the kind of thing where, this, you know, small section of this village had the plague. It had to be, like, quarantined completely. We had to evacuate everyone else from the village, and we're just going to leave them there until they die, and then we're going to go and we're going to burn it all down, and then we're going to take magic and use it to sterilize everything, and then the plague will be gone. You know, it's the kind of thing where in localized areas it's a problem. So, this is important. It sounds like I'm just spouting off backstory. This is important. I promise. Okay? Take my word for it. We're already going on for almost 30 minutes. This is going to go on forever. Oh my god. Second player. So, at the time we were doing this, me and my friend, I'm going to call, I think his character's, either his real name or his adopted name was Lucius. I don't remember the character's names. I'm going to use names when I can, and then otherwise I'm going to just use a descriptor, which, learn characters' names. I only forgot 2 of them because they weren't good names. No, I remember 3. There's one character I don't remember the name of. Okay, so only 1. So, first character, we're going to call him Lucius. I don't remember if that was his real character's name or the current identity, but Lucius was what we'll call him. So, that was Lucius. Second character, you know, he, like I said, me and Lucius's player were roommates at an apartment, and we needed a new roommate. We had a friend recommended to us. He came in and knew a ton about D&D and Pathfinder. Well, he knew a ton about D&D. We actually introduced him to Pathfinder, but he played 3.5 so much that it was a quick fit for him, so he was fine. But he knew way more about RPGs than us. He was raised on it. Brandon came to it, you know, because of some friends in high school. He taught it to me. Alexei's, sorry, I shouldn't use his real name. This kid's, okay, now you know what his name is. Alexei's parents taught him Dungeons and Dragons. So he made a character. I'm going to start using his character's name. I think it was Arcadius. Yes. If not, then that's his character's name as far as you're concerned. He made a character, Arcadius, who was sort of an archetypal character for him because he was like, he wasn't sure. I told him Pathfinder is just 3.5, and he was like, I believe you, but I want to be, just to be safe, I'm going to play a character archetype that I played all the time, and that's my personal favorite. He played a Necromancer Cleric. When he saw we didn't really have any good melee people, really, not like really good, we didn't have a tank, let me put it that way. He sort of was half Necromancer, half Battle Cleric, so Battle Cleric is going to be heavy armor, charge in and hit with weapons, and then be able to dispense out magic to do support when I need it, but also use magic to buff myself. And then he also had Necromancy, and so, you know, ideally he was going to, you know, be able to kill people and then discreetly make them undead and then pop them into a bag of holding or whatever and hold on to them and then take them out at the appropriate moment. However, Necromancy would not be looked upon very well in this kingdom, so he was also playing a very secretive character. His character, I like his backstory, it's not nearly as involved, but I like it. His character, you know, worshipped a god that essentially, he was true neutral. He cared about undead and helping undead. They were his kin in his mind because of the god he worshipped, and he believed that he was going to help them. If he found an undead character on the outskirts, if you found a vampire or whatever living, which, you know, wound up kind of almost tying in with Lucius, and it sort of was building to that, and I imagine that would have become more of a theme had that campaign continued past the point where it stopped. And so he's very much interested in doing that, and the best way he figured out is to do that discreetly is by being a gravedigger. So he is the gravedigger. He spends a lot of money in character to, because he wanted to justify this. He has a shovel that is able to magically then expand out into a scythe, because he wanted to be as like, this character archetype, like, yes, it's a cleric who wears heavy armor, is a necromancer, and uses a scythe. Scythes are also, again, this is important. Scythes are crazy because they have a ×4 critical modifier. They don't have any range, so it's just on 20s. ×4. 4. One of the few weapons. I don't remember all the ones that have ×4. I know most of the firearms do. And then scythes. That was basically his character. He was a gravedigger in the city. People are like, gravedigger, whatever. And he uses that to sort of discreetly do things as he needs to do. He's true neutral. He's not a bad guy. He just doesn't have any particular inclination towards good. You can't really be good and be a necromancer in Pathfinder. They decided that they wanted to nip that in the bud, just because it was easier if necromancy was evil. I understand a lot of people dislike that. I'm okay with it. It makes sense to me. I get why some people don't. They're like, I want to be a good necromancer. I've seen someone try to do it, if you're a sorcerer, and I'm like, spell says evil on it. If you use it, it's hard for me to justify you being good. But anyway, so he was our cleric. He could also heal using a feat that he had, but he wasn't focused on that. And again, the party didn't mind him needing it, ever. 2 more players, like I said. The other one was a person I had met the year I learned playing. The year I learned to play Pathfinder. He watched us for a while, and then eventually got involved through another, session that my first session that I GM'd was his first session, or my first campaign I GM'd was his first campaign playing. So I was used to him as a player, so I invited him along. If you're watching this, you probably know who you are, and I'm sorry for what I'm about to say about you. It's not personal. He's just not to be fair, he's just not a good player at the end of the day. Not a bad person by any stretch of the means, but he wasn't a very great player. We sort of stumbled into making his character in my first campaign useful, but it was a stretch, and it wasn't very good. He was poorly optimized, and a good GM would have torn his character to shreds. So he makes his character for this campaign. He is a rat folk, and he's the other name I remember. His name was Rick, I think. He had some long name, but his nickname was Rick. It's like, okay, that's easy, Rick. Yes, like I said, he's a rat folk, why I brought that up earlier, and he's a ranger. He focused on dual wielding. It's okay. 2-weapon fighting, there's feats, ranger, that's one of the 2 archetypal ranger weapon styles. They introduced other variants, but it's either bow or 2-weapon fighting. So he's doing 2-weapon fighting. The problem is that as a small creature, he has penalties to strength, and he has small weapons do less damage. You can get around this in a couple ways, but he didn't do any of those. He was under the mistaken impression that weapon finesse added dex to damage. It doesn't. There are certain ways to add dex to damage. They're very specific. And I don't think he knew how to do any of them, and some of them didn't even exist at that point. One of them didn't come out until very recently, the rapier one. The other 2 were like for dueling sabers, dueling swords, the outdoor dueling sword, I think is what it's called. And there's one other. I forget what it is. Point is, he thought he was going to get dex to damage, and then in the first session he learned, no, that's not what weapon finesse does. You get dex to attack, and you do not get dex to damage. So he was okay at hitting things with his swords. They did barely any damage. Barely any at all. He was pretty much good at that. He had other good skill checks, but he didn't use them very well. His character, he was an immigrant. He decided he was playing it. So I was like, okay, kudos to you. You're playing, something that makes sense. Not many rat folk are going to get citizenship. It's pretty hard. And he was a scavenger. So he interpreted that as he tries to loot every room for every object that is in that room and asks me what all of their description, weight, and value is. Here's a hint. Do not do this. You will make your GMs angry. I do not want to decide what the weight of these plates are, what the weight of this silverware is, how much you can sell it to someone for. I don't want to do that. I'm going to give you money. I'm going to give you loot. The scavenging is clearly just a character trait to give yourself something that you do that is memorable. It's also annoying. Find fun traits. You have an accent, like my player. You are hiding the fact that you're a necromantic cleric, and therefore you're just sort of very, like, yeah, I'm cool. Don't look too deep into things, like, Arcadius. So Rick's pretty useless at the end of the day. He does what he can, but it's not very great. Our last player was just a girl who we needed a fourth player, and Lucius's player knew someone who he thought would be good at the game, and he invited her. And she made the only characters whose name I don't remember, and I'm really sorry. It's an elf, and she was a female elven ranger. She was an archery ranger instead of a two-weapon fighting ranger. I think it might have been Ariadne. I'm just going to say Ariadne because I need a name to call her. So let's say it's Ariadne. Really sorry if it's not, and it's something totally... Anyways, so Ariadne. Elven archery ranger. She didn't know the game, but she learned it very well, very quickly, and Lucius's player helps her a lot to, get up to speed and give her feat suggestions. She was just a straight-up archer. Damage, she did good. Like, she learned her role pretty quickly, and she got good at... She used a thing that let her out her int damage. She did pretty good int, and she learned how to do all sorts of different stuff, and she used her pet pretty well, and she did good. It was, I was very proud of her. Her character didn't have as much personality or a backstory. She said she had one, but she wasn't totally sure about it, and she wasn't super confident in it. She hadn't really gotten into the role-playing quite as much yet. She learned that over time and had demonstrated that in other campaigns. But this one, it was her first. We sort of let it slide. She did a good job interacting her best and playing in combat, so, she was good. First-time player, she did very well. It's rare to have first players that do that well. She did very well. Not to toot my own horn, I did pretty well my first time, but we're the exceptions usually. You usually get more people like Rick, who their first campaign or two, they make some duds. So that was the party, essentially. They all conveniently start at the same bar. Now I'm finally to the start of the campaign, which is not even the story that I'm looking to tell you. This is all set up to a story, like one session. But I just have to explain this entire campaign to you. I'm really sorry. So I said I wasn't going to stop myself, and I did. Keep going. So these are our four. They all go to the same bar in this capital city, and basically one night it just gets accosted by these thugs. They run off with some money. The party, being a bunch of otherwise problem solvers, go chasing after them. Yada yada yada. Help out, do stuff, typical D&D stuff. But turns out in doing this, they pissed off the mob. There's an underground mob in the city, and now they're after the players. So the players have to go and work to take out the mob. So over the course of a couple sessions, the players root out and completely obliterate the mob. Skipping one of my dungeons in the process by just being smarter and better and interrogating people and being good. What I learned later, and I said I was going to explain, that Lucius' player played an alchemist really well, mostly. He made one mistake. And one mistake made his character way more powerful than it should have been. I'm just going to bring this up just because I think it's a thing that people might get wrong. When you alchemists throw bombs, and as you expect, a bomb has splash damage. It's not just going to hit the one person you throw it at. Surrounding people are going to get makes sense. They always get hit with the minimum amount of damage possible, and they get a reflex save to dodge all of it. He was under the impression that they basically got half damage and a reflex save to dodge it. That changed a lot. A lot. Like, in the early levels, it's not as huge, but as you get more dice, the average damage and the minimum damage, like, are half the average damage and the minimum damage, the disparity starts widening. And you start doing a lot more damage to things than you should be. But anyway, because of that mistake he made, and Arcadius being a great player, and Ariadne getting very good over time, they did a great job and crushed this mob. So that gets the attention of the king, and specifically his right-hand lady, a monk named Inaria. She's a human monk. She serves him very dutifully. She's sort of his confidant and his person who goes out and, you know, does his tasks out and about, and, you know, greets people and assigns duties and orders and controls the guard and yada yada. She does all that kind of stuff. So she, you know, basically invites the party to a meeting with her, and she basically says, you guys got a bunch of criminals and did a really good job, and we commend you, and we're, you know, they pay you a, you know, a bounty, essentially, and they also offer them more work. They say, we've seen some goblins out of the city, they've been harassing people more than usual, our guards have been needed elsewhere, have been getting bothered, and we need you to deal with them. So the party goes like, alright, they go deal with the goblins. The goblins have been like stealing stuff from the farmers to make makeshift weapons, and they try to set up like encampments and traps in the forest, and the party sees right through it and just steamrolls them. And but they discover evidence that it looks like the goblins are communicating with some orcs, and the orcs seem to have a bigger plan going on elsewhere in the kingdom. So they take this back to Anaria, and Anaria's like, okay, I'm going to send you guys and my sort of like special task force guard. They're essentially, they're not really the city guard, they're just some soldiers that I want to start using to do special tasks around the kingdom. They haven't really proved themselves entirely yet, and this is a good example, but I want to send you along with them just to make sure things are okay. And they're led by a paladin who's kind of a nice guy. So the party and this paladin and his soldiers go over to this canyon where the orcs are apparently planning a thing. And it turns out, you know, the orcs are planning some bigger thing. It's going to be like an attack on the capital or something. And we're like, what's okay? And the party completely steamrolls these orcs and then gets a, you know, evidence of where the orc stronghold is. And it's like, shit. And right now I keep being like, wow, you guys keep steamrolling my encounters. And this is going to be a recurring theme. They, you know, the paladin doesn't, and the soldiers don't do a great job. They're fine, but basically they realize that they're useless, and the paladin, something bad happens involving the paladin, and basically he feels really bad. And he wants to prove himself by going with the party to deal with these orcs. So the party's sort of like, the cleric really doesn't like it, but he's like, I will completely blow my cover if I don't like you, so I'm just gonna stay out of your way. And the party goes to deal with these orcs in the desert. They find the orc leader, they steamroll these encounters for the most part. Like I said, theme. And they find a crystal ball. Now, this is my mistake. I thought the cleric Arcadius was at a level 2 where he could use the ability to use the crystal ball. He was actually like 1 or 2 levels too low, so they had to go back to the capital and show them the crystal ball. Basically, it connects to another crystal ball, which turns out is belonging to some drow. And these drow apparently were collaborating with the orcs on this attack on the capital. And by using the crystal ball all the way back in the capital, they're now no longer close enough that they could, like, catch the drow before they run away. Because now when they use it to see the drow now know, look, they know where we are. So the drow start making a beeline to escape the capital, or the kingdom. So Anaria and her soldiers and the party go and intercept them, and they, you know, stop the drow at the end. Basically, that plot gets shut down again. Then, yes, like I said, I'm almost to the actual story, although I might sidetrack and do something else before I tell it, because I'm silly. Then, they find evidence that the drow leader that I found was planning on meeting some more drow, apparently, from outside the kingdom, that they wanted to team up with. And they can track where this supposedly is to a town in Bale, which is that northern country right above them. And so they're worried. They're like, drow in Bale, I don't like the looks of this. So Inari goes back to the king, and the king winds up inviting the party to like dine with him and meet him. And the party's very honored, well, except for Arcadius, basically. And the king's pretty much like, this is trouble. We're worried about the stability of our nation. We will give you special permission. This doesn't really happen, but we will let you leave the kingdom and go investigate the city, or this town, or wherever this letter came from. We can't send people our people into Bale, like, marching, like, with our, banners and such, or with our army, because that'll look like an attack. And the King of Bale is not going to, let another group try to invade his land, and that would just be bad. But if we send you, you're just citizens. So, yeah. So we need to do that. If you succeed in doing this and figuring out what's going on and helping us make sure that we're safe, we will make you all diplomats. All of you. Even the rat folk, who is just an immigrant. We'll escalate you all the way up. So the party's all like, yup, we'll do it, yup, okay, good, yes. So they hop on a cart and start heading out of the kingdom, go up to the pass, and start heading into this town in Bale. Now, like I said, I'm going to sidetrack here. We're going to talk about what was supposed to happen. So we were about to reach this session where everything in this campaign went wrong. It was the last session of this campaign. Not necessarily for the reasons you might think. It was actually the last session for just simple logistical reasons. Because we were all college students, it was the end of the the fall semester at the time. And when we were going to come back for the spring semester, Lucius's player was going to be about an hour and a half away at an internship working. So he's going to live farther away. And so it was no longer a guarantee he'd be able to get up every weekend to play. So we, decided we would call that campaign quits. We got a good reason to for sure call it quits. Call at the end of that session though, but it had to end anyways. But I'm going to talk about what they were going into, what was supposed to happen, and where this campaign was going. Because again, purpose, point. I'm making one. So that they're going to this town. Unbeknownst to them, this town is actually full of spies. All of them. Every villager in this town that they're going to, this letter seemed to be indicating Drow were going to meet other Drow at. They're all spies, and they're all working for an elf named Vrask. Vrask is the left-hand man of the King of Bale. See, I'm already setting up some parallels here. It's very intentional. Vrask is, in Pathfinder terms, Inaria is 15... Okay, let me back up. Inaria was 15 levels of monk. Vrask, I wanted to multi-class. So I gave him a little bit more levels because sort of multi-classing, you usually wind up being weaker than just straight levels in class. So Vrask has 10 levels of rogue. He has 5 levels of duelist and 5 levels of assassin. So, in theory, what he's good at is burst damage, and then having decent enough defense that he can hopefully survive what remains of the combat after burst damage. That's sort of how we should go. And in, a great world, he gets people flanking you, and then he just annihilates you because he has sneak attack damage, and he just wrecks your house. So, he's supposed to be a total badass. I neglected to equip him with magic items properly. I focused primarily on his ability scores and armor, and didn't really give him weapons with cool properties. They were just good. They were not ridiculous. They were just kind of weapons. They weren't crazy magic. Like, I could have made them... There were certain features you could put on there that would have made them really good. There was one magic property, I think, that didn't exist at the time that would have been really helpful. I think that gives dex damage. So you can add your dexterity to damage on attacks, but that one didn't exist in the book. The book that was in wasn't out at the time. So, but he's generally pretty much a badass, and he has this village full of spies. They basically, it's at a crossroads, sort of in Bale, if you're coming from, again, you have the Creole, sort of, you come out of that Oval Mountains, and so you sort of go, this is right from my perspective, but not yours. I guess it doesn't matter. You sort of can go this way, sort of loop on the path to get to Bale, or like, at that, there's like, a fork in the road. You can go up that way and go to this other country. And so, therefore, from the other country, the way to get to Bale, from in that direction, you're going to have to go down and then get to that crossroads and then go towards Bale instead of going towards Frail. So pretty much all the traffic coming from that end of the kingdom is going to wind up, if they're on the road, it's going to pass through this town. And so this town is full of spies who, essentially, Vrask has a ton of spies. He's constantly sending out agents all over the place, and when they sort of need an easier job, when they've maybe gone on a mission and they need to, like, relax, they basically just act normal in this town and gather information and then bring it all back to Vrask. And Vrask is, you know, like I said, serving the king, so he's doing whatever the king wants. Gathering information, pulling off assassinations, doing all this stuff. He is a rogue. He is also evil. He's pretty evil. He's neutral evil. He's not the worst person in the world, but he's very evil, very selfish, would stab you for himself readily and happily. So this thing with the drow is not... The party doesn't know... The party has all the wrong assumptions. None of what they think is true is true. Everything is not as it seems, which is sort of what my intention was. It's going to wind up, you know, thing where a bunch of stuff's happening, and then you're going to sort of blow open. And the party, I think the party was expecting that things weren't as they were being told, but in character, they're doing a good job of following along. Yeah, it makes sense when I have this thing about a, you know, closed-off kingdom that there's going to be some secrets. But Vrask was actually the one in contact with these drow, pretending to be these other drow. He was actually trying to lure them there because he was going to get rid of them, in this instance. Specifically because they were a liability. Why were they a liability? Well, here's the thing. Vrask is working for the King of Bale on a very long mission right now. So it's sort of a long con, in a sense. There's actually a resistance group inside Preal. The players did not know about this. There's an underground resistance. It's deep underground. Like, leaders and most of the members are not public at all. Their communications are super secret. They have one meeting base. It's up, like, in the mountains in the northeast, super hidden away, and people almost usually aren't there because if people go there en masse regularly, then it'll be obvious where it is. This resistance is super underground, but once they were strong enough to think they had real, I don't know, once they got enough people so that the energy of them maybe felt like we can do something, they started to analyze what their best action was. And they realized there's no way we're ever going to get enough people to deal with the army of Preal. The real only way to take a kingdom like this is to get the king and use him as a, you know, take him hostage and use him as a bartering chip to get power. And from there you just start making demands and instilling a new government, and you wait for people to get, you hope that people support that new government because you make it better for them. And then you win them over. And then at that point, you know, things are good. They realize they don't have a way to do that. What they can do, however, is contact the King of Bale, who has classically not been a great relationship with Preal. They trade, but, you know, Preal rejects a lot of stuff from his country and, you know, prevents him from, you know, doing commerce. And, you know, when he's fighting a war, Preal doesn't, you know, like, help him or grant him any, you know, usefulness. Like, he's like, I will trade you, I'll pay you for munitions or for, you know, I'll pay for you to support me. And Preal's like, nope, we're good just sitting in here in our perfectly defensible position that no one's allowed into. So he's not really a huge fan. They're basically like, we know you would love to trade with us. We know you would love to have some influence in here. If you and your people help us take, you know, the capital, we will take the king hostage. We will start instilling a new government. You enforce it with your soldiers, and we will trade with you. We will massively increase trade with you. And the resistance, basically, that's kind of what they want anyways. They want open borders. They want trade. They want to interact with the rest of the world. They're tired of oppression and of the citizenship and all of that stuff. And Bale wants something in the kingdom, and I'm going to get to this. Bale actually couldn't care less about a lot of that stuff. It angers him, but it is what it is. But there's something in Preal that he wants, something specific. And Vrask knows what this is, but, you know, he basically tells Vrask, you tell them that we, you know, are aligned with them, but we don't think their plan would work entirely. We want to add another layer to it. You know, they start building up forces, start slowly moving people to your base so that we can, you know, prepare for an actual attack. We are going to start instigating some of these, you know, lesser races into his mind. You know, the orcs, the goblins, the drow, whatever. We're going to try to get them to attack. Here's our plan. We get them to launch a foolish attack on the capital by instilling them with confidence and making them think they can win. Rask can do this by telling them that there's these outside drow and instigating them with that way and using contact. Giving them ideas. Basically, Rask starts feeding everything with all these lies and deceptions and stuff. So I said it's a long con. They launch their first attack. It draws a bunch of the army out. They probably don't do much damage, but they get this city into a state where it is less organized. You guys very quickly move in once that attack is done. When they think that they're about to turn to lick their wounds, that's when you attack. Meanwhile, we are ready, basically at that moment, to march our soldiers in, and after you manage to, you guys can basically, you are strong enough to take the capital and hold it for a period of time, a short period of time. You can hold the king ransom for so long. Eventually that'll break down. Do it for long enough, and we will be able to march our soldiers in and start, enforcing your rule across the land. And we will reinforce your control of the capital once we show up. But we need to, we can't start moving in until you've taken the capital because the king has more motions than you are aware of, that even I'm probably aware of, that he could activate if he knew a big army was coming. So you need to use the tactic of guerrilla surprise, where we're gonna be seen coming since we're charging in through this very narrow path, and there's going to be able to be a way of warning that we're coming. You need your chance of guerrilla suddenness. You need to do that and use it to your advantage. So Vrask is manipulating all this. Once the drow start failing, and they're going to come up there, he realizes, shit, they're going to learn that I've been lying to them. So he basically starts, he plants a way to lure them out into a spot where he'll be able to take them out. So, you guys know too much. Because he tells them, you do this, you might lose, but there's a resistance group in Preyal, and they are willing, they will let you have power if you help them overcome the kingdom. They will make your people citizens in this kingdom again. And the drow are like, fine. They're not happy about that. They're probably going to try to rebel against them too, but, there's a good start for them. So he's been taking them out. But, so he's sort of frustrated and worried because he's not sure how his plan is working with, in regards to this takeover. Because the King of Baal wants something in Preyal, and so they need, this is their way to get it, because that gets them into Preyal, so they can get a thing. More specifically, no, I'll save that for in a little bit. Okay. So the players, are going to this village. I'm going to talk about what is supposed to happen. What I have planned. Again, since, like I said before, this is about over-planning. So I'm going to talk about what I had planned. Then I'm going to talk about what happened to that plan. And then I'm going to analyze it, okay? That's how this is going to go. So first, what I planned. Players are going to get to this village. Rask is going to recognize, because he has a lot of spies, that they are the people who were involved in all this fights in Preyal and stopping the orcs and the drow and the blah, blah, blah. His people are going to ambush, basically the party's going to show up, it's going to be normal, and then by the end of the first day, they're going to get ambushed in some form, and everyone's going to get knocked unconscious. And Vrask is going to basically, strip them of all their stuff, throw that in chests, put them all in cages, throw them in a room, and then sit down and wait for them to wake up. When they wake up, they're just going to be sort of no equipment, stop from using any magic in specific ways for them. That they can use their abilities. Excuse me, sorry. And he's going to talk to them. He's going to say something that they're actually not expecting. They're expecting this to be the big bad or some evil jackass or start threatening them. But he looks at them and he says, "This isn't what you think. I'm not your enemy right now. I was going to kill those drow that were coming here. That was my plan. There are no other drow. That was all me. Whatever you think me and the King of Baal are doing, that's, whatever. I don't really care. Preyal is not what you think it is. The king and his Anari, his monk, yeah, I know about her. They aren't good like you think they are. They've done a lot of bad. The kingdom has got blood on its hands. And specifically, I know for a fact, when you go back there, things aren't going to go your way. Okay? But here's the deal. I don't want to kill you. I have no reason to kill you. It will be a waste. I could, especially now with you in cages, but I have no reason to. There are 3 doors in this room, you know. Back that way, there's just a small, like, closet. There's a chest with all your stuff in it. It's there, it's unlocked. I'm gonna go through that door. Behind that door is me and a ton of my guys. It's not all of my guys. There's a bunch of them still out in the village. But it's most of my guys. 20, maybe more. I don't know. And that's not counting all the guys that are away, obviously. And there's that door. And that's the way out. Take that. There's no one in your way. You can go out. You'll get back out into the village. Your cart and your driver haven't been harmed. All your stuff's in there. You can check. You know, everything's fine. I will, you know, unlock your cages and go into that room, and you can leave. If you come into that room, me and my guys will probably have to kill you. Because if you are trying to fight us or get answers, we gotta stop you. But I'll let you go right now. Okay? Okay. So he unlocks their cages and then walks into that door and, you know, ignores them. Party, at that point, hopefully since having been beaten by the people getting ambushed by them before, being intrigued by what he is saying, take their equipment and leave, hopefully. They also have an answer. They can complete their mission. They know there were no drow outside the kingdom. That was all a lie. The Vale people were going to destroy the drow, which makes me believe that they're not against us, I guess, hopefully. And that's it. So the party, at that point, you know, goes back to, well, was meant to go back to, party would go back to Preyal. They get on their cart and they start traveling. They get to the checkpoint, they're showing their papers, and the guards at the checkpoint say, you just try, you know, pull out, like, what is this? Pull out some contraband. They're like, that was not there. That was, you know, we did not take that. That was planted. And they were like, you're trying to bring contraband in it. Like, this is super illegal. Like, you're all under arrest. And starts trying to arrest them. And in that same moment, tons of Vrask's agents jump out and start taking out guards. And Vrask jumps in and is like, these guards are going to kill you. Come with me if you want to live. To take the classic line. And the guards are basically like, kill all of these people, and Vrask is like, I can get you into the kingdom and someplace safe. Let's go. And the party has no choice but to go with him because the other people are trying to kill him. And they're not listening to reason. The guards are like, they're criminals, kill them. So Vrask leads the party in. And you can already see why this is over planned. Trust me, I am getting there. Vrask leads the party in, takes them to that secret resistance base I was mentioning in the mountains, and starts telling them what's up. So it turns out, he had, since the defeat of the drow, and the King of Preyal seeing this idea that people, something from Vale, even drow from Vale, who wouldn't be accepted in Vale, they would be a splinter group, you know, of underground assholes who would try to kill all the humans, essentially, in Vale. The idea of Vale outsiders made him suspicious, and he apparently, Vrask has learned, he knew about the resistance for a long time. Because they weren't taking action, he was waiting. And he says, my resistance people, one of them was stupid, and they got caught. Around when you guys left, resistance members all over the kingdom who were not up at this base and were in place to do certain tasks still, got caught. Specifically, like, the 4, like, main leaders who are my contacts, who are needed to plan and execute our big coup. They got kidnapped. They're gone. we have some, we have troops up here, and we still have some troops who haven't been caught who could be in place, but our big guys, they're gone. We need them. This kingdom, it betrayed you. When they came back, the guards planted that contraband on your card. They did that. And they did that because the king thought you guys knew too much. He thought you guys were getting too smart, you were getting too good, and he wanted you done. He wanted you out. So it's going to take you and throw you in jail. Possibly kill you, because no one can know too much. No one can be too privy to what's going on. Once they are, they need to be taken out. So this is his death trap. Send you out to deal with his dirty work, and then imprison you. Especially because, if you just knew too much about what was going on, and the kingdom couldn't know that there was this much theoretical instability. Also, at this point, he starts telling the party all sorts of things, a mix of truth and lies, to turn anyone who still is, like, not persuaded to join him. The big thing he tells, I planned this specifically for Lucius, the plague has killed so many people in Preal, and still kills people. There's been a cure for it in Bale for over 100 years. And Preal has blocked it being imported. Specifically, they will not allow the import of that drug. And other technologies that Bale has that could save lives and improve everything. That was meant to specifically enrage Lucius and say, okay, this government needs to go down now. So, the party's, several sessions, the party goes and goes undercover and rescues all these people. And it all builds up to Vrask, the rebellion, and the party launching a coup and invading the capital city. So now the city that they're protecting becomes their battleground. The party's main goal is not to sit and fight lots of skirmishes against enemies. Basically, the party says, the revised plan is Vrask and you four get into the castle, get past everything. We will fight and distract people. You just get through the city, take quick passages, get into the castle, kidnap the king. We need you to do that. And Vrask is like, I can do that. With these guys flanking me, we'll be good. And they're like, alright. So the party launches that. The party goes. The coup launches. They fight through the city, doing a few skirmishes that they need, but not too many. They get into the castle, and they get to the king. They burst in. The party's like, yeah, we made it. Like, the king can't fight back. We're ready. And here's where things go on ahead. Well, again, this is all theoretical. Remember, none of this happened. This is what was supposed to happen over the rest of this campaign. Vrask, the second they are in the room with the king, no matter what the party said, what the party did, Vrask just walks up to the king, like, elbow checks him against the wall, pulls a knife to his throat, and says these exact words: "Where are the virtues?" And the party's response, I was hoping, would be, what? This guy who has been playing them in a sense, but also not in a sense, this whole time, who they managed to believe he's the one guy who's here to, like, help us fix this shit. And he's just asking about something called the virtues, and we have no idea what he's talking about. Him and the king basically ignore whatever the party says. And, Vrask is very specific, like, don't get near me. Do not come close to me. I will handle this. I have business. If you want this to go your way, just stand there and calm down. Party attacks him. Then, basically, I was going to give him an out. Where I was basically going to say, because he has a knife at his throat, no attack you throw will be able, he will always be able to react the second he knows one of you is doing something and pull the dagger. Like, that is such a slight motion at his moment that he can do it. And if the party protested, I was going to say plot. Again, over planning. I didn't even think about how bad that could have gone. Because I was just like, guaranteed I was going to get there and get in there. It's going to sit there during this epic monologue I had planned. Basically, I wanted Vrask and the king to go back and forth. The king being like, oh, so that's what you're after. The king is, Bale. The king of Bale isn't ever going to know where they are. And you're not going to either. I'll die with the secret. And Vrask is like, they argue back and forth. Vrask is just like, alright, and kills him. And the second Vrask kills the king, Narya and her guards burst through the door, right behind the party, and say, "He's killed the king, stop him." And Vrask's agent bursts through the windows, and Vrask is like, "I'm out, see you guys." And the party has a choice. This was meant to be my defining moment for the campaign. The party can either choose to stick with Vrask, follow him out, and escape, or they can say, "I don't trust this anymore," and try to help Narya and beg for forgiveness and to figure what's going on. Basically, regardless of who they side with, they ask the inevitable question, what are the virtues? What's going on? And they get the story told to them. Here's the story. I'm going to sum up the story because I have a really long version of the story, but that part's actually not important. The important part is just basics. Before a lot of the kingdoms were established, there were these 6 heroes who fought a lot of monsters and saved the day. They were super powerful. In their sort of great final battle, they were all killed, and there were powerful soul-eating demons, monsters, whatever you want to call them. And in order to prevent their souls from empowering these demons, the gods imbued the souls with a certain form of permanency into the world. Basically, their souls were no longer their souls. They were never allowed passage into the afterlife. Instead, the energy of their souls and their power were embedded into sort of a physical form, like I said, like the Triforce, like I don't know, some sort of magical state that could be used by people, but is sort of not real, but real, you know what I mean? Like a floating sort of shape of energy. Basically, it is all of their power condensed, and they specifically align it with what they call the virtues. Each hero was known. The reason I was just doing stuff because I was opening up a document, because I always forget these, and I want to read these specifically because I like these. Heroes were each known for upholding a virtue, and I don't mean virtues in necessarily the traditional sense of some of them, but like in terms of good things. Instead, what it more means that each of them has a way of life they espouse, a thing that they say, this is what I do. And they do not believe that is more important than everyone else's. They simply believe that is what they can offer, that is important. And the reason that these heroes worked well together is because they all represent different things and they balance each other out. And the 6 virtues were, there was a fighter who had the virtue of honesty, there was a paladin who had the virtue of honor, there was a rogue who had the virtue of cleverness, a cleric who had the virtue of compassion, a druid who had the virtue of purity, and a wizard who had the virtue of practicality. So you can see they're very different. Like, practicality and cleverness aren't really virtues that people would think of. I was doing this at the party. They didn't have to be all good, except they weren't going to be. And because, well, Vrask isn't good, and you're going to see why that's important. Basically, you need to, the virtue, these power sources embody the virtue that the person represented in their life, and therefore, well, they're not sentient. The person's mind is not remaining in the virtues. Sort of their ability to deem someone worthy of carrying on that virtue is inside the energy source, and therefore, the virtue cannot be used or eaten or consumed or whatever by anyone who is not worthy of it. Therefore, protecting their souls and stopping these demons from eating it. Again, long-winded, but you get my point. So there was a family at the time, a very powerful, so probably the most influential family of these, before these kingdoms had formed, when it's just villages and scattered clans. Very powerful family, who has 2 sons, who are close to the heroes, who find the virtues and sort of bring them to, without using them, but take them and lead them in some form back to where their family stays. And each one has a different opinion of what to do with the virtues. So the elder son, whose name is Bale, believes that they should attempt to wield the virtues that they are worthy of and find their allies who can wield them and become new heroes and continue their work and protect, basically say, we will become the enforcers of our clan. Our family can, leads our clan. We're going to force everyone to unite and fight anyone who uses power to fight and protect ourselves. And the younger son, Prayal, you see where this is going, says, no, we cannot let anyone use these powers. These are too dangerous. We need to steal them away and protect them. Ultimately, the family agrees with Prayal. It's too dangerous. And Bale argues, very strongly, no, we need to wield these, and the family eventually says, for your insolence and your refusal to do the right thing, you're exiled from this family. Leave. Get out. You are not part of this family or this clan. And Bale says, fine, screw it. He goes north. And Prayal says, I'm sorry that had to happen, but thank you for standing by me. And so, him and his family, they begin what their long task of protecting these will be. First they build an ancient cathedral that is, meant to be devoted to them, but then they decide that makes it too obvious, so they sort of keep the cathedral, but make it devoted to other stuff, and then seal the virtues far beneath the cathedral in secret compartments, and they devise traps and mazes and blah blah blah, tests and all that stuff. And they start uniting all these clans and building them in ways that will, keep dangerous people away from this cathedral and away from, the virtues. But they also don't want to make it too obvious. Not many people know the story, but it still could be possible. And Bale always knows it, and he's gone who knows where. They begin spreading out, but always keeping this secret and keeping an eye on things, and spreading out larger and larger until they, become what is essentially the fledgling kingdom of Prayal. Prayal, the kingdom and the family, his descendants, take on his name as their family name to honor sort of his, choice and his goodness in dealing with this. And eventually, in the very early days, extremely powerful ancient wizards raise the mountain range around Prayal that keeps it sealed, that keeps it protected. You probably thought it was very silly that there was a mountain range shape like that. Yes, it is silly because it was made artificially by wizards. A wizard did it. Classic. I know exactly what I'm doing. Anyway. And obviously, Bale, who went north and is now sealed above the mountain range, starts his kingdom with his clan of people, and that kingdom becomes Bale. And both the family of Bale and the family of Prayal, there's now two splits of this family, both of them tell their descendants and keep the story of the virtues. Prayal keeping the virtue, saying, keep the virtues safe, and Bale saying, one day we should get the virtues because we should use them because they are powerful. That's what Bale wanted. When the king of Bale, the current king Bale, learned about this resistance, he sent Vrask in not because he wanted to do this, but because he wanted to get to the virtues. He saw this as his chance. We can get to the king, you can try to figure out what the virtues are. One way or another, the party hears about this, and basically Vrask says, if it's with Anaria, she wants to protect them. Vrask, he's like, there's one last place we can figure it out. And, Anaria's like, there's one guy who knows, let's go talk to him. Vrask is like, I think there's one guy who might know, let's go find it from him. Party goes basically to the cathedral one way or the other, either to try and protect the virtues, or to try and get them with Vrask. Because, Vrask basically says, yeah, I lied to you, but here's the thing, they probably are going to make this kingdom better, but there's way more loyalists in this kingdom than you know, and Bale's army is coming, whether you want to or not. So you need a way to deal with all these loyalists and make sure that they don't overcome until Bale comes in and keep the peace. And you also need to make sure, if you really care about this country, you should probably make sure you're powerful enough to make sure that Bale listens to you and has things go your way. And if you have the virtues, then you can probably trade a deal with him. So how about you come with me and help me get the virtues? And we can get things the way you like. And Anaria basically says, we need to make sure this kingdom does not fall. I understand things were corrupt. We went a little crazy with our system of control because we were so paranoid about the virtues, but you need to, we can fix it, but we need to make sure that we get the virtues, keep them safe, and then unite everyone left in the kingdom to prevent Bale from coming in and taking over. The party sides with whoever they want, or in theory they could side with no one, but that's really hard. And they get to the cathedral. Inevitably, basically, the 4 party members, Inaria and Vrask, each one winds up to the virtue. And that grants them mythic power. And then the campaign sort of resolves. I mean, that's sort of the beginning of a whole other arc. But basically, of them siding with, with the faction they've sided with, uniting the people, fighting against the people they don't want, and then all inevitably leading up to Bale invading on my big reveal, which is that the King of Bale has a massive airship. So, like I said, they're technologically advanced. And he charges in on an airship, and the party's either siding with him and, help him clear the way so his airship can dominate people, or they're, flying up to this ship and challenging him on his own airship and trying to take it down. And that was sort of where that campaign was sort of going to go. And they were going to get power and decide the direction of where they want things to go. Simple, right? Guess what I'm about to do? I'm finally going to tell this story. It's only taken me 1 hour and 20 minutes. I'm sorry. You probably didn't need this context. I just think it's valuable. So flashback, so rewind. The party is traveling for the first time to the village where they're going to meet Vrask for the first time. My simple plan was that I had sort of breadcrumbs that were going to lead them to a bar where they would ask for information and narrowly be given drinks. And if you ingest a poison, you can have multiple doses of a poison can be ingested at the same time, and it raises the DC, which is the difficulty class, of the poison, which makes it harder for you to resist. So a lot of poisons have low DCs, which means they're easy to sort of not be affected at the level that party was at. But ingested, I could stack it multiple times, and it's easy for someone to poison a drink multiple times. It's just dump a ton in, and there you go. So basically, I give the party, I was like, I'll give the party perception to notice her sleight of hand of doing this, and then they'll all get fortitude saves, not to be poisoned. But if they are poisoned, it'll knock them out for a couple of hours. And sort of my plan was knock as much of them out at first that I can, and then these rogues who can flank people will flank the enemy, or flank the remaining party members and quickly knock them unconscious. Simple. And I was like, I always have Vrask as a trump card. I can pull level 20 against the party at the time was level 8, I think. Level 8 or 9. Either way, level 20, you should be able to wipe the floor with whoever's left. First part of this plan that goes wrong. Party splits up. Don't split the party. But the party decided they were going to split the party. Lucius and Ariadne decide they're going to go to the bar, and Arcadius and Rick decide they're going to sit on the side, and Rick's going to try to pawn things off to people. That's what they're going to do. So, thankfully, Lucius is not yet at the alchemist level where he's immune to poison, so I can still do my poison thing. He has good resistance, though, so I'm like, he'll probably make it. But whatever. So him and Ariadne go to the bar. They both fail perception to notice their drinks are poisoned. They both take a drink. Lucius rolls, it was either a 1 or a 2. If it's a 2, his bonuses weren't good enough despite everything. And if it's the 1, auto fails, he's unconscious. Ariadne's just like, shit. And the other 2 players are like, we can't metagame and show up, but fuck. Basically, 5 rogues descend on Ariadne and her pet and quickly take them out, knock them unconscious. She fights valiantly, but it wasn't a fight she was meant to win. I think she thinks that they were meant to win. I don't think the party realized I was trying. I didn't want them. Well, again. Over-planning. The party's never going to play and understand that they're going to lose. They're always going to try to win. So, my plan was flawed. But in more ways than that. I'm going to get into those. But anyway. So, Ariadne and Lucius are now unconscious. I'm like, good, I got 2 out of the 2. Well, we're going to get 2 coming in, and I don't get a chance to poison them. So, I decide on my trump card. There's enough time passing, before their characters say, we get suspicious and go to investigate why they haven't come back from the bar. that I can justify in my head putting Vrask into the bar. Now, I basically have it set up so the bars, you get to the bar, and it basically has a door, and then it immediately goes downstairs. So the bar sort of goes into the ground instantly. So you go down these stairs, and then there's sort of, the door you go through, that way, through that door, and then the bar sort of is open past that. But I sort of have Vrask off to the side here, so when you run in, he's in enough shadowed area, I justify, that with a stealth check as good as he has, I will give you a perception check when you run into the room, but I will justify him being able to make the stealth check pressed up against that wall in the shadows. That if you fail the perception check, you won't see him, and you will run into that room and start doing stuff, and he will be there, and you won't see him. Normally, it's kind of hard running at someone just out in the open, but I justified it, and I needed to justify it. So I'm ready. So Arcadius and Rick run into this bar. When they get there, they see, as they're running in, they can already see Lucius and Ariadne's bodies are being dragged away by several of the rogues. They're being dragged into some door in the back that they're going towards. And they run in, they run past the door, and I'm like, alright guys, both of you roll perception checks. So Arcadius rolls whatever, and Rick rolls a nat 20. So I'm like, fuck. Well, Rick, you see, right over here, there's this guy. And I put him on the map, and they're like, okay, well, fuck. Good job. And I'm like, you wouldn't have caught that without a nat 20. You are a jackass. And they're really like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. You don't fucking understand what you just did. So, here's the problem. Now, Vrask can't get burst damage. He can't get sneak attack. Well, not the normal way. You can get it by flanking, right? So I'm like, well, as long as I can flank them. So first time, so combat begins. Arcadius summons a lion. He summon monster. He summons a lion. The lion goes and starts attacking the other rogues, the ones that are dragging Lucius and Ariadne away, and basically cuts them off from Vrask, Arcadius, and Rick. So I'm playing, and I'm like, I think Rick will go down for easier, so I'm going to send Vrask after him first. Makes sense to me, right? So Vrask goes over to Rick, they start fighting. Rick goes down real fast. I think it was like 3 turns. Which maybe isn't fast. Maybe like level 20 you should be able to do it in 1. I'm like, listen, his specialty is burst damage. His specialty is not sustained combat. After 3 rounds of sustained combat taking out this guy, I think that's pretty decent, okay? So, Vrask has a lot of attacks, and he has, decent damage. And he can hit pretty easily on their AC. So, Rick goes down to about 3 turns. So what's Arcadius doing in those 3 turns? Well, he's enjoying first of all, he's enjoying his lion maim through these rogues. The lion does kill all of the rogues, so before you say, like, why don't you just send in the rogues to, like, move them so they could flank? The lion stopped them and killed them all. And those 3 turns, though, Arcadius is actually buffing himself with a variety of spells. He's casting some things on himself. I'm sorry, this is the part of the story that I wasn't playing this character again. This is a part of, again, why I say tell the story that is your story to tell. But this is still my story to tell, even though this moment does belong to him. He buffed himself with a number of cells. Basically, it made him super strong and way more durable than usual. So Vrask takes on Rick, and he's like, awesome, just finished buffing myself, let's go. He pulls out his scythe, him and Vrask start fighting. Quickly, I'm noticing he does more damage to Vrask than I expected. He's hitting Vrask's pretty decent AC more often than I expect. So I'm like, okay. And I'm doing less damage than I expect, and hitting a little bit less often than I expect. And I'm like, this ain't good. So I'm not really feeling super good, but Vrask is doing okay. His maximum health is about 150. I think it might have actually been exactly 150. He gets down into his 70s, so he's at about half health. And I'm like, okay, he's taking half health, that's a bad sign. I'm going to go out. Okay, next turn, he's going to run away. I'm going to have him, he can run fast enough. And once he gets outside, he will get a chance to roll another stealth check and start hiding again. and then I'll try to do more burst damage. And if Arcadius doesn't run after me, then I don't know. I was assuming he was going to run after me. I didn't really plan much further than that. This was just my immediate thoughts. So I'm like, alright, next turn, gonna run away. But, you know, so Arcadius takes his roll, nat 20. Gets happening. I'm like, well, fuck crits, but he's level 8. It's like 75 health. I'll probably live. Here's the thing. Sights. Like I said, ×4 crit. So that worried me. Part of his buffs and his feats allowed him to add a negative energy burst to the end of a crit. I believe at that point it's either up to 3 or 4d6. Maybe even d8. And scythes are d8. Actually, they're 2d4, technically. Which sounds like a d8, but it's actually better than d8, because it doesn't have, you can't roll 1. After he adds everything to his crit, with all of his buffs, with the negative energy burst, he does over 80 damage in one hit, and knocks Vrask unconscious. And I'm like, alright, I'm pissed, but I don't fudge numbers. I don't make shit up. I don't lie in my game. I'm like, alright, you knock Vrask unconscious. And he was like, at this point, he's realizing this was my badass NPC that he wasn't supposed to kill or defeat, because I'm flabbergasted. I am like, he's unconscious. And he's like, yeah, and he's thinking in character, and he's like, yeah, I had to be in character. I cut his head off immediately, and I'm like, yeah, okay, he's dead. It was when I say, alright, he's dead, and campaign ruined. Because in my mind, I'm like, you killed Vrask. Vrask is central to this campaign. What happens without Vrask? If I follow the actual, like, if I as a GM don't rewrite what happened, you guys go back to Preyal, you get arrested, and no one saves you, and you get thrown in jail. Or you try to fight back, but there's no one to help you and you get overwhelmed. Or you manage to defeat them all, but then you are now wanted criminals in all of Preyal, and everywhere you go, people try to stop you. And you have no one to help you. And you don't know about the Resistance, and the Resistance doesn't really know about you. So in my mind, everything's ruined. We'd already sort of known we couldn't continue past that day, and now I was like, well, that's a good enough excuse now for us not to continue past this anyways, because you just ruined everything. And I'm pissy. I'm like, that was, you played well, you did good job buffing yourself. Why the hell can you do 80 damage at level 8? How the hell can you beat a level 20 in one-on-one combat? He's like, you needed to give him, he's like, that wasn't what he was good at. Why didn't he have this? He's, he's way better than me, so he's like, this is what he should have been doing. This is what he should have had. And, blah, blah, blah. And I hate it, but I'm like, yeah, alright. So I'm pretty upset at that point. And since then, I've thought about it a lot, and I've learned a lot. First thing I will address, again, like I said, I have a lesson and a point. Let's address the first thing. Number 1, there are plenty of ways within this plan that I could have made that work on the fly. The most obvious one that I came up with was a bunch more of Vrask spies / rogues / flanking helpers come in from behind them in the bar that were trailing the two other party members without them knowing, and they come in, and you summon your lion, but there's Vrask, and now here's 5 more rogues from behind you to grant Vrask flanking. Yes, that would have been easy. I didn't think about that at the time because, again, I plan in my mind, and this is flawed. I will acknowledge it's flawed. I understand the difference now, and I understand changing things now. In my mind, characters and the world that I plan are going to happen the way that I planned it. Because that's the story, that's the world. In a fictional, it doesn't exist, but it's following a chain of stuff that I have set up. Things cannot just happen because I need them to, if I didn't already plan or establish them. The world isn't going to suddenly change. The Kingdom of Preyal isn't suddenly no longer going to arrest the party because the party killed Vrask. In my mind. When it comes to that campaign, at least. If I wrote a campaign in the future, I would try to write it and make it in such a way that I wouldn't mind making these kinds of changes. That story I would have, though, because again, it was so over-planned that everything, if I start changing one major thing, the plot of how everything else is going to go. How does the plot go where they go back to Preyal, they're not criminals, and they become diplomats? What happens? How do they get introduced to the virtues? How does that even come into play? It doesn't. The point of, like, my campaign, I told them from the beginning, they didn't know why. The campaign, you can give campaigns names. Not everyone does. I do. The campaign's name was Virtuous. Like, it was about getting them to the virtues and giving them mythic power. That was the moment that the campaign was building to. So, again, like I said, so the first point, yes, I could have changed things to make that fight work. So, all the combat-focused DMs are like, well, you could have done this. You could have changed the counter like this. You should have done this. Yes. Inexperience. I thought he could win, and I thought he was fine. When he started losing, I did not think bring in more people, because in my mind, like I said, those people do not exist. I realize as the DM, you can just create them. You can make them just exist. That's just not how my brain works. But okay. Past that. Number 2. This campaign was too heavily planned. Again, I will say it over and over again. Because it is the main point. Not the most interesting point, but this is the main point, and the thing you should take away. Your campaign should not be this overplanned. Your campaign should never rely upon things happening to your players. Players are really good at getting out of the things you want to happen to them. Now, that's not to say you can't have linear or very specific planned story events that force your players into something. But it needs to be something that the players cause. So, let me give you an example. It's okay if I get to have the players get to a magic cave where there's a gate. Some kind of, like, a wall, a gate of some kind that is magic. And there's one specific way to get through it, and no other way to get into this cave. And when they do this thing to get into it, it's going to finish. So the players can sit and try all their silly methods all they want. But, I've already established, you can't get into this cave without this way. So I'm forcing you to discover what the correct method is. If that then gets you into this very specific plot that you can't get out of and you have to deal with things, that's fine. But, at that point, then I now welcome you to creatively find solutions, because now I'm throwing you into the lion's den. But if you're in any situation where you're setting up a situation with the expectation that a certain thing will happen to the players. Players will always find a creative way to get out of what you do. The thing about being a player, it's hard. Because a lot of us are good and want to follow the DM story. But it is very difficult to not try to beat what they are sending against you, because that's what it feels like the game is about. And this is starting to build in my other point. But I'll say, you cannot plan on your players not doing things a certain way. You cannot plan on your players succeeding or failing certain things that are required. There always has to be a backup, but you always have to be willing to invent a backup on the fly. There cannot be a chain of things that is completely broken if the first thing in the chain falls. There needs to be stuff that, if it's plot essential, the players need to literally not be able to impact it. The better solution to, I said, in my first point, I said there was a solution to the Frask, that combat. The sort of 2 better solutions are aspects of that are, number 1, Frask doesn't show up in that combat, and Frask does not show up in combat to them at any point in that encounter before he has a chance to talk to them. But I had no reason for him to be there to talk to them without them outright trying to attack him, because he is the enemy at that point. And if he suddenly tells them all the information that I had him tell them when he had them that I wanted to tell them when they're in the cages, but they're not in cages, then there's nothing then I have not built in them a fear that will stop them from just saying, we're going to try to fight you and figure out what's going on, because we want to help our kingdom and learn what's going on here. And something's fishy, and you're not telling us the whole story. So, and again, I guess I'm now building into my third point, which I should just outright state. My third point, so again, sorry, for a third point, conclusion about that, don't railroad your players unless it's in a way where they're going to get it, and it's not going to be forceful, and it's not limiting their ability to creatively solve things, or when they creatively solve things, you getting angry because they screwed up something. Third point, though, it's kind of the interesting thing. There's a more interesting discussion to have. What was I using combat in that session for? Sounds like a weird question, but it's very purposeful. What was I using combat for? You can look at it in a couple ways. The simple version is I was using it as a situation to cause the players to lose because I needed them to be unconscious so that we could advance the plot. That's mostly accurate, but I think it goes deeper than that. I needed a situation where the players thought that this villain and his associates were too powerful for them to fight back against, so that when he offers them certain information, it is surprising to them in such a way that they will then take the actions I want them to. I'm using this combat to show them that this character is fully capable of crushing them. Sorry, throat getting dry. So not only is this character capable of crushing you, but he chose not to. It is a classic story trope. The character fights these people, lets them live, gives them all this warning information, and those characters now have a different opinion of that character because they said, we were at his mercy, we could have been dead. But we are not. We are alive. And that says something about him and about us, and that leads to interesting questions, which lets us proceed with the story. Very simple. Combat in Pathfinder was designed with a very specific intention and a very specific purpose. You can talk about different... What am I trying to say here? When you are designing a game or a system for a game, there is a purpose in mind you have to have. If you don't have a purpose in mind when you're designing, your design will go nowhere or it will be flawed. Your design something well, it needs to accomplish a certain thing. You need to want a specific goal or purpose that this design will fulfill, and then it will be good. Pathfinder is a well-designed combat system. The combat has a specific purpose that it is designed to accomplish. That purpose is to get players to work together in a strategic way and try to make optimal characters who can then overcome challenges and accomplish tasks, and then be rewarded for the overcoming of those challenges. That is its purpose. It is about player victory. The combat serves the purpose of allowing the players to achieve victory and feel accomplished. But it's not easy victory, but it is meant to be their victory. Killing off the party members or having them lose an encounter is a failure of one or more people at the table to play properly. It could be the DM, could be the players, could be everyone, whoever, whatever. The DM's ideal version of the game, if you're a real DM and not a jackass, is one where the players get through all of the encounters and experience what is meant to be experienced. But getting through the encounters involves winning them. I had hit a roadblock in my story, or just came up with the idea of the story, regardless of D&D. I was just coming up with a story, just as a story in general. And the thing that I wanted to happen to the party is that kind of thing that happens in stories. So I came up with it. But combat in Pathfinder can't serve that purpose. The players have no way of knowing that they're supposed to lose. They're going to try to win because that's what combat is designed for. And in character, they have no reason to stop fighting, so they're going to try to win. I didn't design that combat to be a challenge for them to overcome. But, not being very good at overpowering them and not wanting to be unfair, I tried to design an encounter where they would lose fairly. because they just were not equipped in the situation they went into. I underestimated their abilities, which is bad, but I also designed a combat encounter where my goal was not what combat was designed for. What does that mean? Does that mean you can't do combat encounters like that in Pathfinder? I would argue yes. I'm sure players have, I'm sure GMs have done it well. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure this fight will kick your ass and then you will run and then things will change. I'm sure that exists. I think it's hard to do. I think it has to be done very specifically and not in the way I did it. And I think expecting your players... I even make this mistake occasionally when I'm thinking about other things. Like, expecting your players to realize that they should run instead of trying to win is flawed. And if you have good enough players, expecting them not to win is flawed. Your players have determination, they have resources, they have ideas, they are creative. They will try and find a way to win. And when they die for trying to win, they won't feel like, oh, well, you obviously tried to get us to run away from this fight and we threw ourselves into the chaos anyways. They will think, wow, that was an unfair fight. I really feel like that wasn't a fair thing for you to throw at us. And if you say, well, you're supposed to lose and run away, they're going to be like, the fuck? Really? Because it's ridiculous. It's not what Pathfinder is about. It's not what D&D is about. It's not what that system is about. That's not to say that that's not something that should be involved in tabletop role-playing. And this is an important point I want to make. This is sort of what this is building to. There's this problem a lot of people have where they don't realize that D&D and even other combat focus like Shadowrun, GURPS, God, I can't think of any others that are big. I don't know. But these other combat focused RPGs, they can't think of a reason to not use those to try and tell the story they want. They say, this is awesome, this is a system that lets us fit into this setting, and then I can tell my story. Which is true, but each system, generally these systems that all involve combat, they all have one thing in common. The players are meant to win. Combats are meant to be a challenge for the players to succeed and triumph at. That limits the type of stories you can tell. That's not to say that they aren't interesting. That's not to say that people haven't broken the mold and done really bizarre and interesting campaigns with these systems. But at the core, they've either A, used the systems in the way they were intended and just they managed to come up with a way to make the story interesting, but still have the same underlying systems. Or the players were aware of moments where the combat wasn't for its usual purpose, and the players were therefore able to be meta-aware and make choices that allowed the story to progress. But that's metagaming, and that takes away big point of role-playing. And, it's the kind of point we break down, well, why aren't you, if you're not doing the role-playing part, why don't you just play a miniatures war game? Role-playing is the purpose. The miniatures war game is to resolve conflict. And because Pathfinder is about telling stories that are about heroes succeeding and triumphing, or villains succeeding and triumphing if you're in an evil campaign, which you probably shouldn't do, but I'm in one right now, so who am I to judge? Then, and the combat is designed to let you tell that kind of story. There are systems that exist that tell the kinds of these other kinds of stories that couldn't be told in Pathfinder. Talk about one. I don't want to ramble. But one, for example, would be a system called Burning Wheel. I haven't played Burning Wheel, but I've read quite a bit about it. Heard a number of great things about it. One of the big things that I hear about it is that combat is deadly. If you get involved in combats, you will either die or you will live but not be particularly in a good state. The thing they do with combat that's interesting, it's very simple. Every character, let's say combat's happening between two people. So they both engage. They each pick their next 3 moves independently and secretly. Like, imagine it's 2 fencers. Like, they each pick separately. They're like, okay, lunge, parry, riposte. Like, they pick those as their 3 moves. And then the other opponent picks, like, parry, 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 because they're, like, defensive. And then, you know. But obviously it's not exactly that. There's specific moves you can take based on what weapon you have. But, and then, you know, you compare all 3 moves at once, and basically each move that happens at the same time, it's like a rock, paper, scissors to see what resolves. Okay. That's the basics of it. Usually people die or get their arms cut off. If you're fighting in Burning Wheel, you're probably in a bad spot, and you might probably gonna lose, or you're gonna be permanently maimed or injured. Which is how combat kind of is in real life, especially in fantasy. Like, if you get into a sword fight with a guy, you're not coming out fine. Or if you do get attacked, a guy isn't gonna touch you and make your, like, arm wound stop bleeding. No, your arm's probably broken and useless. Hope it's your left arm. Oh, it's your left arm? Good. Oh, wait, you're a lefty? Bad. So, Burning Wheel is all about characters. It's all about your character has personalities and traits, and you have to play them. You can't, if your character has a personality trait and it comes up, you're not allowed, for the benefit of the party or whatever, to not follow through. You do things that follow through on your personality and your character. A DM can throw you into a situation, a Game Master in Burning Wheel can put you in a situation where you're meant to lose and realize you lose because you're in Burning Wheel, you're not expecting to win combat. You're not expecting to get into combat with someone and win. You know? But the kind of story I was telling in Pathfinder isn't necessarily a Burning Wheel story. It's not what I'm saying at all. It doesn't fit that genre in general. But the combat that I did was, I don't know if there's any setting that my story fits into. Again, just don't. But I know I was using in many situations, and I was going to use in many situations in that campaign, the Pathfinder combat system for a purpose it wasn't meant to complete. I think this is important, especially if you're a newbie GM out there and you've sat through this. Thank you. Kudos, by the way, for sitting through this rant. But the important thing for you to take away here is you write a story that is built around the system you're using. If you're using Pathfinder, write a story where the heroes are meant to win. The player characters are meant to succeed. Not try and come up with a fun time where you knock your players unconscious to try and prove a point or tell a story point. It just won't work. Write a different story. And if your story idea seems like it's going to be a lot of work or the players aren't going to get into it, change your story. Playing the game, excuse me, is about fun first. I know it's fun to get through your story. I get that a lot. It's what the fun, but the party, the whole table has to be having fun. Everyone, GM and all players need to be having fun. So write a story that you enjoy that is also something that the players are going to react to positively, something that they're going to get. They're going to run into situations and solve them, and accomplish them and be heroes and be happy. Their first instinct is going to be to fight and win, and that's going to be the correct instinct. Play to your players. Know how good they are, and don't underestimate them, or don't expect them to fall into things. But I guess most of all, just don't ever go into a situation and think that you know what's going to happen to your players. You know how they're going to solve something, whether or not they're going to be able to solve something, how you're going to defeat them, whether or not you're, don't assume that ever. They will surprise you. They will win challenges in ways you weren't predicting at all. And you should just be ready for that. The reason I'm yawning is it's getting kind of late. I spent way longer than I intended recording this video. But I wanted to do this finally. So thank you, first of all, for sitting through if you've watched this again. I don't know if I'll do more of these. If I come up with more stories that I want to tell, then there'll be more of this. If not, then I think this is my big RPG story. This is the thing I talk about with people. I talk about fucking cleric did 80 damage in a crit and killed my level 20 NPC. What the hell's up with that? And we can all joke about it and how ridiculous it is, but it was my fault. It was flawed. It wasn't well done. And you shouldn't do stuff like that. On a lot of different levels. And I hope I've explained those levels to you. I hope you enjoyed hearing what my campaign would have been from at least a story perspective. I hope the plot sounded interesting to you. I wasn't boring as hell. Hope you enjoyed hearing about these fun characters that my players played. Except for that rat folk. Sorry. Sorry, Rick. You're just a bad character. Bad player. Anyways, that's all from me. I'm probably gonna go to sleep. Have a good time, wherever you're watching this, and see you later.